Hi, I'm Sumit Bose, and this is the Net Hero podcast. Who's it for? It's for you. If you care about the planet and you care about business. We believe that businesses are responsible for a lot of the damage that has been done to the planet, but they're also responsible for finding the solutions. We need innovation, we need ideas, we need people who are trying to make a difference, and that's what this podcast is about. If you know someone who is trying to make a change, then get them to come along on the podcast. Listen in every week, subscribe, and make sure that you follow us on social media. Our two news platforms, Energy Live News and Future Net Zero, cover everything we do. And this episode is recorded live, so enjoy.
When we look at where we're going in terms of how we get this net zero future, you'll have seen clearly a big issue around planning. Now, this government has come in and tried to tear up the rule books when it comes to planning. The truth is, there are still a lot of people, and I don't blame them. Would I particularly like to have a wind turbine right next to me? No. Would I like a massive solar farm if I live in the countryside rocking my view? Perhaps not. So there are issues around kind of planning that have started to affect the way this transition will go. Also, there's got to be market confidence for people to develop these things. Now, you may have seen the big latest round, they call it AR7, but that doesn't really matter, but basically an auction to say who's going to build loads of wind turbines. The one before, no one went for it. This one was a record. So these two issues of kind of how we grow so that we encourage companies to invest, because the governments can't do it themselves, but also how we deal with the issues around planning is something that I think could be a bottleneck for net zero. So is it the case, and how can we navigate it? I'm joined today by Kirsten Oliver from WSP, who will help us go through this. Hello, Kirsten. Thanks for joining me.
Hello. Good morning.
Morning. You and I are the sort of same generation. If you think about when we were young, right, and energy, there really wasn't much to talk about, was there, in terms of things being built? We never really saw it. It was power stations that have been around for a long time. And that's all changed in the last particularly last 10 years. Suddenly you look out over the sea and people can see arrays of like wind turbines. You go any train journey, you'll probably see a solar farm. You're seeing new things happening. So nuclear plants being built again. Before we talk about kind of the main issue, this whole thing about how we plan infrastructure, I suppose the difference is before it was all done kind of because government said we're going to do it. Like the way they built the railways, they built the power stations, and then nothing happened for a very long time. So no one really worried about it, did they?
Absolutely not. But also we use probably far less energy. As you say, we're a similar generation. We came home from school and watched telly and had one TV.
Correct.
And one choice of things to watch. We're now in such a digital age where, everybody's in their bedrooms on their iPads using AI. The amount of energy that we need now is an order of magnitude, if not more, exponentially different to where it was when we grew up. So we need more power. We need more power, and therefore we need power from different sources to give us that sustainability and that security of our power sources, not only for us as domestic users, but also for commercial users.
Where do you see this net zero journey right now?
We're on a journey, and absolutely it's a journey. When we saw the Clean Power 30 plan come out 18 months ago, it was a very ambitious journey. I think We're all on the net zero page. How we get there, we've got to get there at pace and speed. And we're not going to get there by waiting to be told what to do. I think that mix of policy, planning, government intervention, industry intervention, and stakeholder engagement is absolutely key, not only to create the power that we need in the future, but also to create jobs in the UK and to keep the lights on.
You've seen, everyone's seen this kind of, whether you call it, reset, bifurcation, although the numbers actually say something different. But Trump's going back, right? He's going towards fossil fuels for America. And yet that's not necessarily all the case, because he does believe in nuclear and he wants to push on that front for low carbon. But America's actual latest stats show enormous growth in renewables. Same in China. But there has been globally a bit of a rethink on targets. There's been a rethink on market confidence, investors saying, really, do we want to put all this money into this? So when you say, we're on this journey and, we're continuing. Are we, or are we just having a kind of, how do I put it, after the initial kind of enthusiasm of it all, everyone setting targets, saying we're going to go for it, is a bit of reality biting?
I think, we've got to look at it from all perspectives, haven't we? And I think global politics is always going to shift and it's always going to change. I think the journey we're on in the UK is setting our stall out, but we need multiple power sources. We need everything to 2050. Gas is still very much in the agenda for our sources, and therefore we need to run all of those projects in parallel. I think where we have seen investor confidence, where policy reform, the Planning and Infrastructure Act really kind of helping give that investor confidence and really helping secure that supply chain and secure that pipeline of work. Yeah. Whether it be in carbon capture for existing hydrocarbon facilities, hydrogen generation, or whether it be in renewable source. But the key to all of that is grid upgrade. That's absolutely essential. That's the biggest bottleneck and the biggest break on any delivery. And we need that grid connection and the grid upgrade, irrespective of, where the power's coming from, the original energy source.
Let's talk about what I said right at the beginning. I'll get onto the wind auction in a second. But planning is a big thing, right? Because, as I said, old days, we're going to build a railway. Adios. China's pretty much the same. Hey, we're going to drain a massive lake and goodbye, off you go. We've not had to have what we're having now for many years, for many decades. It's people going around going, we're going to build massive infrastructure. Yes, there was the Channel Tunnel, a few railway lines, but nothing like this. I don't know what your take is on whether the public are conceptually they might be up for this, but suddenly when someone says I'm going to build massive battery storage, I'm going to put huge pylons up, I'm going to put massive wind farm, people start to get a bit annoyed.
I think we need to get those people on board, don't we? We need the local community to be engaged with us and see the value that new source of energy is going to bring to them. Local skills, local jobs, upgrade investment in the local community is absolutely key. And I think that's a balance, isn't it? Of, we've got to bring those people on the journey with us, not by force, but equally understanding what the benefits will be for that infrastructure in the future for them as bill payers.
Do you think the idea of kind of paying people, the stuff that came out late last year, we'll give you some money off your bill if you let us build a, solar farm next to you? I mean, basically bribing people is in simple terms, or the idea that, people can say, well, actually, we have had it, to be fair to them. Some developers go, well, you don't want that many turbines. Well, we'll relook at the plan and maybe get less turbines, but they're more powerful, something like that. There's going to be to and fro, isn't there?
It's a compromise. I mean, I think the Green Gares wind farm up in Scotland is an absolutely excellent example of a community project constructed on an old coal site. Really got that community involvement in it and community ownership and on board. We're not going to be able to do that with everything.
No.
And as I say, it's a balance of need and pace required to actually ensure that these developments continue and the projects are concluded at a sensible schedule and a sensible price.
I was talking about the topic of grid connection with someone else the other day, and they mentioned that we're probably going through the same thing that lots of nations are, which is power used to be where the source of energy was. So where there's a big coal seam in this country, you had loads of power stations, and the grid was built for that. Connections were built close to cities. Well, if we do more renewables, particularly offshore, well, these things are stuck in the middle of nowhere, all right? And that's the big issue. So is there a real, no, I wouldn't say blocker, but it's got to be a big challenge to get the power from where it's going to be generated in the future to where it's needed now, built on a system that was devised for the past.
Absolutely, and it's back to the grid connection, isn't it? Of wherever that power source is, it's got to connect into the grid, and we've seen some of the updates to that. So you look at NESO's pause on the applications for grid connections. Yeah. And they've reset that where we've got a really congested 700 gigawatt queue.
Yeah, we don't need it.
So what they're looking at doing now is prioritising what comes into the grid and removing those projects that aren't, because wherever we generate the power from, it's got to come into the national grid system.
Where do you see the position of offshore wind? I remember Boris said we'll be the Saudi Arabia of wind, right, before he went. And then old Miliband is he loves his turbines. He might as well wear one on his head. You saw the auction before, no one went for it. This one, AR7 was quite successful. What do you think's going on? Even though AR7 is based on kind of one big company, going for it in terms of big farms. But also, sorry to caveat that, but we've also seen a major wind project from Ørsted being shelved because there wasn't confidence. So on that whole issue of offshore wind and where Britain is, how do you read it?
I think AR7 restored that commercial realism, and it gave developers bankable, low-risk financial models. And what that ultimately does is reduce that volatility and give that stronger investor confidence. When you compare it to AR6, which, as you said, there weren't any successful offshore wind bidders. There were others in other energy vectors. And then you compare AR5, which there were people, but the strike price was so low that the economic viability of some of those projects is challenged. But this larger, more stable AR7 pipeline signals that the UK energy policy is credible and investable. And that boosts that supply chain confidence. I think the reliance on a small number of developers with that really does just reinforce, the delivery scale and concentration risks that we need. And therefore, the supply chain need to be ready, but they need to have that confidence reinstalled that, that developer is ready to go. I think, the developer has a huge track record for large scale project delivery. I think if we had a reliance on a number of small special purpose vehicles, we'd have less confidence. But I think having the backing of some great international investment along with the Planning and Infrastructure Act really does guarantee that future offshore wind delivery. So I think it's positive, AR7. See far more than AR6, but that wasn't difficult.
Do people want to put their money there, though? That's the question, globally.
Globally, I believe so. We are seeing international investment. We are seeing the planning infrastructure sector and the commercial models being investable. And we are seeing that relatable message that hopefully will bring that money in. It is, for me, it seems it's much more predictable in the policy signals. We've seen a huge amount of change policy, planning policy.
Yeah,
there is the foundation for any investment certainty.
And in terms of jobs, this is the other thing. You've seen, you look at a whole bunch of things. If you look at the way jobs are going in Grangemouth, for example, right, and we've had the Lindsay refinery as well. You've got a real issue here where we're trying to transition these old technologies and old fossil fuel-based industries, but the gap to get the jobs isn't there right now, and people are being left behind. So 2 questions on that. How do we make sure that these wind turbines aren't all imported from China or Denmark or wherever the hell they're coming from? How do we ensure that the jobs are local? How do we make sure that people who are in these industries, that we are making it with the stroke of a pen, we're making them obsolete, that they have a future?
Yeah, I think I'll take them in reverse order. I think skills are transferable. Absolutely. We need to, it's terminology that's different, but building a structure offshore, which has got a substation on it is very similar to the structure that we would use for traditional oil and gas. The stakeholder engagement, the planning, the accounting, the financing, the digital skills that we're going to need in the future, they're all transferable skills. And apprenticeships, as well as retraining, is absolutely critical to achieve that skill set. I think when you start thinking about moving into different regional delivery models where we're bringing offshore wind farms onshore, that's an opportunity to regenerate local communities. And I think that should be seen as a positive. At the moment, when you look at the distribution of workforce around the UK, it might not be in the right places, but to be able to develop that local community to deliver on their doorstep so that everybody goes home safe at night is one of the key issues. And we're seeing that in the Great Grid Partnership. We're seeing the projects that are being awarded through the construction companies in those, really do have that the intent that, instead of people travelling, you mentioned nuclear earlier, instead of people travelling to one of the big nuclear facilities and living in accommodation day in, day out during the week and then going home to their families at the weekend, the spatial plan, the breadth and depth of where offshore wind farms are coming in and where renewables and data centres, etc., are being located, give much more of a regional focus on job creation rather than it being centred around a few specific areas.
What about supply chains? Because obviously that's the other thing, is that governments trying to say it will do this, and in some cases it is. But we do live in an international world, right? People bid for jobs, and then you could get stuff. The irony of ironies, you could be building a renewable project with bits of stuff that are carted across the world on a massive ship using diesel, to power it. So how much compunction will there be on this government and future governments to try and, use more and create more jobs here to manufacture these things here?
Yeah, I guess, that's always the elephant in the room, isn't it? But that's got to be balanced with cost.
Yeah.
We have seen commitment recently for manufacturing facilities. We have got that ability to do that, but it's got to be done at a reasonable price point. And that's the challenge. And that is where digital automation transformation is going to help us become more competitive in that market.
Do you think within 10 years we'll have sorted all this out and we'll have a much more balanced system? Because some people, look, my personal view is we're never going to get to the 2030 target, and I think everyone probably knows that. There is momentum and there is movement. So let's give ourselves some time. Let's go to 2035 or even 2040. Do you think there'll be less of these grid issues that you mentioned right at the beginning? There'll be more kind of distributed energy system in place. And the killer question for business, as well as us as individuals, is how much is it all going to put on our bills?
I think that's the challenge, isn't it? The NESO Strategic Spatial Energy Plan will provide that first blueprint for what and where infrastructure would be, which helps spread that out. But I also think we've really got to think about an integrated joined up delivery program across that generation, transmission, storage, ports and distribution, not absolute isolated investment.
Yeah.
But it's back to, we've got to upgrade the grid before we can start plugging alternative power sources into that. So that's absolutely critical. The Great Grid Partnership is up and running. It's got a huge number of projects in there to upgrade the infrastructure that we've got. So I think, everybody's got their views on 2030 targets, but, I don't believe, my personal view is that we won't see the grid as being the bottleneck by 2025. There's a huge amount of effort being put into that now, huge amount of commitment from the supply chain and the partners to scale that delivery. And it's visible. You see job creation, you see the upgrades going on, and that's part of the disruption that consumers don't like to see. But that's the essential. And you look at, we've got to spend money, we've got to reduce bills, we've got to do everything. But we've got to do it all in a sensible, pragmatic way and have that whole system thinking. We've talked about the grid a bit, but you look at international collaboration and most recently the Hamburg Declaration, signed by Belgium, Denmark, France, Germany, Ireland, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, as well as us in the UK. And that's really looking at strengthening European cooperation on supply chain, offshore grids and resilience. So it's not a UK story. It's a European story in terms of offshore wind. And then we've got to blend that with the global uncertainty and the geopolitics that's going on. Scotland, is absolutely essential for this clean power strategy. And we've got the elections up there. I think the industry need to rise, or the sector, really do need to stay above the politics and to maintain that delivery certainty. And I think, we've got some of the building blocks in place now, and we just need to keep that momentum going over the next 12 to 18 months. I think that's going to be critical to make sure that we do keep on that agenda for clean power.
Last point, you've got to take the public with you in this, right? Mm-hmm. We still live in a democracy. Other parts of the world, pretty easy. They just build things, right? Because they're going to, and screw the people who are living there. Do you feel, we've talked about business, we've talked about policy, but at the end of the day, do you think consumers are still into this? It goes back to that planning question I asked right at the beginning. Or do you think people are starting to go, this is just unaffordable?
Again, it's mixed, isn't it? I think we've still got a long way to go on stakeholder engagement.
Yeah, and I agree with you.
And I think that's never going to change, is it? There's for everybody that is in agreement, there's somebody that isn't in agreement. But working with those local communities, getting those teams on board, really understanding what the values are going to be is absolutely essential. And that's a never-ending job, an absolute never-ending job, which just goes back to my comment about, the sector has to stay above the politics.
Yeah.
We need to be based on fact. We need to have that certainty of delivery. We need to have that investor confidence. We need to have that consumer confidence. And that's sometimes a bit of a relentless task, isn't it?
Keep the politics out of it. I like it. That's a good place
exactly.
to rest. Kirsten, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. Really appreciate your time today.
Excellent. Lovely to meet you, Sumit, and thanks very much.
No problems at all. My thanks to Sohi for the production. Remember, get in touch on the podcast. Just if you want to be on it, it's nethero@futurenetzero.com. See you next time.
You've just heard the Net Hero podcast from futurenetzero.com. Join us as we help you find ways to cut your carbon footprint as we head towards net zero. Subscribe and follow us on social media. futurenetzero.com. Better business, better planet.